Throughout our lives and the lives of others, we have all learned that mythology played a huge role in the way thousands of civilizations, thousands of years worked. And one thing that I wondered always was, what if any of them were real? Could any of them have been possible? In this video, I'm going to tell you the top 3 stories that were real. As all of you may know from the popular Marvel series, Loki was a god, a demigod in a sense, because they do die eventually. And if you look into Norse mythology, you can actually find that he plays a huge part in the people's identification, meaning like how they view the earth, how they see things. He played a huge role. So as many of you may know, gods back in the old days in the mythology, they were not how anyone really sees them today. Like, for example, Christians, they see their gods as these benevolent, loving people who are there to help you. And while the Norse gods and Greek gods and Egyptian gods, all the gods, they did help in some aspect in their mythologies, like it helped with rain, with good harvest, all that stuff. They were much stranger in a sense because they were very lustful, would have many affairs at a time, kidnap people, kidnap other gods, and all of them played a part in describing the roles of the earth and how it worked. And I was reading a Norse mythology book, and one of the ones that stood out was one about Loki. So Loki is not how he is described in Marvel as like almost a hero in some aspect. Like he eventually helps Thor and all that stuff happens in the Marvel series. But in the books, he's evil, like extremely evil in ancient mythology. He's been known to kill people, kidnap people, and just wasn't a good guy in general. He'd kill like his siblings. He was an awful, awful person. And on one of these endeavors, he was having an affair with a monster of sorts. I'm not even sure what this monster was called. It was just a weird monster. And so he had 3 children, one of them being this ginormous snake that was described in mythology. And they said this snake was so dangerous, it'd kill thousands of people, it would harm people. So the gods that were up in their realms, like near Valhalla with the heroes, they would come down and basically wrestle this snake and chain him down to the bottom of the ocean. And they said the snake was very upset, he was angry, because he was technically part god since he was Loki's child. And the gods wouldn't release him. They basically told him, you have to stay down there. And so the people who created this mythology accounted this snake for the reason why we have waves. They said that whenever the snake would try and escape, or he would wiggle so much trying to escape his chains, that he'd make the water go in the waves we see today. And the angrier he was, or the more furious he tried to get out of these chains, the harder the waves were. So that's how Loki's child contributed to Norse mythology. Next, we have the night wolves. Norse mythology isn't widely learned about in schools. It's mainly like Greek or Egyptian or Roman. But once you get to know Norse mythology, it's incredible because some of the stuff was used in real life. And like I said in the Loki story, the snake contributed to the waves. The night wolves were attributed to evil. And like in the Bible or anywhere, in most religions, even in science, it is widely believed that the earth essentially came from nothing and that a series of explosions and chance created the earth. But before the earth, it was darkness besides the stars, and that's scientifically speaking, right? Mythologically speaking, or even religiously speaking, it was just blank until the earth showed up. And so most people attributed darkness with these night wolves, and these night wolves never harmed people on Earth, but they were trying to bring back that darkness. And they believed that back in the day, when there was nothing, loads of night wolves would come and meet with all the evils of the world and have fun together, essentially causing chaos throughout the galaxies. And when the Earth came, more specifically the sun, they believed that this force was warding the night wolves away. And so they would worship the sun, they'd say. They'd thank the sun because he was keeping them safe, because they did not like the night. And so the idea was that if these night wolves caught the sun, because they were in a constant chase of the sun, they believed, then their worlds would be doomed. And they believed that these wolves would chase the sun constantly, constantly chase it, and that when the sun would move throughout the day because of the Earth's rotation on its axis, that it was because the wolves were chasing it and it was trying to run away from them. That's why night would occur. And so every few years now, the Earth and the moon and the sun all align perfectly and create something we call today a solar eclipse. And that's essentially those brief few minutes when the Earth and the sun go in front of each other, and since the Earth is here and the moon is here, it blocks the sun temporarily, making it less bright. Now, when these solar eclipses would happen, they sincerely believed that these night wolves had finally caught the sun. And they believed that by yelling at the sun, they would scare these night wolves away. So they'd gather in crowds, enormous crowds, and they'd start hollering at the sun, telling it, you can do it, you can run away from the wolves. And they believed the screaming would scare the wolves. And when the moon would pass and the sun would show back again, they believed they were successful. Religions can be found all over the world, most of them claiming that they are the one that will show you to the light, the one that is the one true religion, with very little evidence at all. And some religions are more believable than others, yeah, but I'm not here to debate that, because I really don't care whose religion is what, or I'm not here to discuss that. But what I'm here to discuss is how similar it can be linked to ancient mythology. And if you look at ancient mythology, it's all really just in the same bandwagon, right? You've got Norse mythology with Thor and Odin, and then you've got, Greek mythology with their gods like Zeus and Hades, and, there's Egyptian mythology, Roman mythology, Indian mythology. It's just everywhere. And in a sense, that mythology wasn't necessarily mythology, it was religion. Why? Well, these religions, or whatever you want to call them, they were ways for people to find hope, right? When the harvest was bad, they'd pray or offer up goods to these gods, or if the wind was harsh, they'd think a god was mad at them, or if lightning came, they thought they were being targeted by Zeus. Really just chaotic things that would happen. And although they're natural occurrences, right, like lightning is not Zeus throwing a thunderbolt at people, but they didn't know that. And the reason they didn't know that is because unlike today, they didn't have science, they didn't have education, they didn't have technology. They essentially had nothing but their own minds. And what I mean by that is when people are scared or frightened or don't know how to explain something, they tend to come up with things to try and settle that fear, right? So in their instances, it made more sense to say, Zeus was mad with me, thus he throws lightning at people, instead of saying, randomly the clouds are coming and attacking people. And to them that made more sense because it had a foundation, right? they believed they could fix it, so it gave them hope, right? The answer would be pray to God or Zeus and be better, respect him, and he won't attack people anymore. And it was like that. And even though in their mythology these gods were extremely lustful, had vengeance with other gods, would kidnap, rape people, at the end of the day it was their religion, and they would go to temples with shamans and all sorts of strange things to help them identify with their religion and help them seek answers for things they didn't understand. And not necessarily always with weather, right? Some of them would go to these shamans and offer worship and prayer in order to find answers for their struggles at home or in work life. And, that was also a part of mythology, but the main player was more explaining natural occurrences in the earth. Because, if we want to figure out how lightning happens, we go to a lab, we analyze, we run data and statistics, and we figure it out. But with ancient mythology, they didn't have that. So they would say, well, the ocean is shaking, the snake at the bottom must be angry or trying to escape. And that was just a way to explain things and to give hope. So this has been included in the top 3 things that were made real, because all this mythology was made real and people actually obeyed it for thousands of years, right? They routinely worship these gods, routinely acknowledge them, routinely offer up blessings and like sacrifices of like lamb. And that was their life, and it came true. Why? Because people who came up with the stories were convinced enough that that was the only way all this can be explained. And their stories were so convincing to the general public that they become real. Hence, they're in the top 3 for the real ones.